I would say that last year, without exaggeration, now I know it was a screwy winter, but there was still a winter. Last year was probably like a true transitional, revolutionary year for fishermen on this lake. Probably because of, it's actually raining in here.
Is it really?
Yeah. Probably because of this shop. You know, the guys here that run this shop are very experienced fishermen, okay, unlike a lot of bait shops you go to. Now, there's great bait shops all around Harrison Township. Each one has their own thing. But not many people have taken fishing, especially for panfish, to the level that was done the last couple of years, probably because of the assistance of these guys that helped direct some of the customers who then had good experience, who then saw that you do not have to fish for perch, bluegills, crappies, rock bass, whatever you're fishing for on this lake to take home and eat. You do not have to fish those fish with live bait, hardly ever. Okay, now, I wrote an article 4 or 5 years ago where I quoted, I just said a famous fisherman who at the time was Al Linder, who said, "I never use live bait for anything anymore." And when he said that, like 6 or 8 years ago, I thought, you're a liar. Like, you're just trying to sell lures. You know what I mean? There's no way that you go ice fishing, that you go perch fishing in the spring, that you don't use live bait sometime. The more I fish, the more I realize that that could very well be true. There's only one time a year that I absolutely say you have to have live bait for panfish, and it's when yellow perch actually spawn, when they're dropping their eggs and actually in the spawning process. Right up until that day, and beginning 2 or 3 days after that, for the other 360 days out of the year, you can catch them just as good on artificial baits as you can on minnows. Okay, and we're going to talk about that. Last year was a year that we experienced here very little or no winter. Okay, and I learned a lot from that, as did a lot of people. Now, I've always been a real avid ice fisherman. And when I ice fish here, and when I got used to fishing here, and I learned a lot about ice fishing here, primarily for perch we're talking right now, I found that you don't ever need live bait. Okay, if you fish with live bait when you ice fish, chances are you're fishing for a different class and a different type of fish than I'm fishing for. I'm fishing for and looking for the spot when I ice fish that as soon as I drill the hole, within 2 or 3 minutes, I'm going to know if this is a mother lode type of spot. Okay, I'm not hoping one comes in and eats. I'm hoping that I'm going to drop down and catch them every single drop. And I use baits like Ken spoons and Guster spoons and jig and wraps and the real fast action stuff 90% of the time when I perch fish, okay, through the ice. So, in all reality, it started to dawn on me that maybe the fish, especially perch, were a little more aggressive than what a lot of people thought, and especially through the ice. Now, ice fishing today is drastically different than it was 10 years ago. Okay, today more people fish fast and do what they call power fishing, where they punch a whole bunch of holes and they move real fast, and they fish aggressive for a lot of species of fish. But it's important to remember one thing, if you're a guy like me. Now, I went to Michigan State and I got a degree in fisheries science. And one thing that I can remember, they taught you right off the bat in the fish class, believe it or not, they actually have fish classes where you go and learn about fish. And your parents pay for you to go there, it's the best thing ever. But one thing you learn is that there's basically 3 groups of fish in the world, freshwater fish. There's cold water fish, cool water fish, and warm water fish. Cold water fish are fish like Arctic char, certain species of fish that are mainly in northern Canada and the Arctic Circle and all these places. Cool water fish are a lot of what we run into. Northern pike, yellow perch, walleyes, muskies, on down the list. Warm water fish are typically the sun fishes, bluegills, crappies, bass, a bunch of other different kinds of fish. A perch is drastically different than a bluegill. And it's drastically different than a crappie, and it's drastically different than a rock bass or a largemouth bass or a smallmouth bass. It is truly a cool water fish. Perch are as active in water that's 38 degrees as they are in water that's 58 degrees. Now, biologically speaking, that may not be true, but I'll tell you this, they're active enough that last year when I fished for them a lot in those periods where there was a little bit of ice and no ice, and we were out in boats, and the water was clear, you'd sit there and look through the ice and see massive schools of perch running shiner minnows up into the bottom of the ice, flashing and thrashing through them, where you see the shiny orange, all the perch flashing through them, and it looked like piranhas feeding. And they're just, and the minnows were flying out of the water and landing up on the ice, and they were coming up behind, underneath the ice and trying to hit them going through the skim ice, because they could see them and they couldn't figure out why that minnow wouldn't come down. And they were hitting the ice, and the ice was popping up, and we're watching this and we're going, you think we can catch those? And my buddy's like, I bet you we can catch those. You know, I mean, that's how aggressive they are. And I'm talking in January, okay? The water was 34, right? Because it was 32 in that spot, and it was 33. And I mean, so it's very, very cold, and they're that active. Okay, and the more that I've ice fished, the more that I realize that they're frequently that active. And at times, so are perch, or so are bluegills and crappies too, but especially perch. Okay, so last year, because of the open water, because we didn't really have any ice, we're going to fish, me and my buddies are going to fish no matter what. Now, I fished last year on the ice on this lake 18 times, and I think that was probably like 16 more than most people. You know, we actually were on a piece that broke off at Metro. We went on a little tiny piece at Gino's where you're standing there like this and the open water was right there. I mean, crazy stuff. Shallow, but crazy, just to get on the ice. But we open water fished then for the other however many days of the winter. You know, and I try and fish not every day, but my wife says I do, you know, so I guess every day. And we fish a few hours in the afternoon or a few hours in the morning here or there. And frequently we take out my duck boat because it's a beater boat. We can beat up in the wintertime. And we fished in the winter. We launched our boat down at Harley and fished in the winter last year, all winter. We fished around the first of the year, I remember. We fished in February. We fished around St. Patrick's Day. I mean, we fished the whole time. And we caught perch the whole time. And most of the perch that we caught on plastic baits like this. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. This is all I did was I just rigged this up for show. These aren't really the baits. We caught quite a few on a tube, but we're going to talk about some twisters, and we caught a lot on these candy plastic baits, which are really popular that they sell here, which are awesome. And we're going to talk about why that is. But this is a little tandem rig, which I already figured out how to tangle. And all this is first of all, this is an ultralight rod. Okay, actually this is a light ultralight, right? Like I said, this is a 5.5 foot ultralight. This is a one-piece ultralight. You know, we take it to the very, very extreme. We even have rods that, like, I don't like 2-piece rods. We even have 1-piece ultralights, certain length, certain weight. You want a fairly long rod, whatever, doesn't matter. Fairly light rod, 4-pound line, good smooth little spinning reel, and the whole bit. These are 32nd ounce jig heads, 1/32. You can get them 64, 32nd, get them down to 180th or whatever, or bigger. But this is the overall size that I like the most for fishing here. And I frequently tie them like that, where it's a tandem rig. Has anybody ever seen or heard of that?
No.
Where people fish, okay, we've got some people that. The only place I've ever seen this publicized is Doug Staney talks about it sometimes in Fisherman Magazine. It's big in the South. And in Ohio, where I learned to crappie fish, this is the way a lot of guys fish. The reason for that is when you take 2 30-seconds and tie them together, they cast like a 16th, but they sink like a 32nd. They sink independently, but they cast as one. So you can, I can cast this. I don't want to do it because these have hooks. This is just a 2 30-seconds, and I can easily throw it to that back wall. I mean, I can be fishing around boat docks in the harbors around here, and I can cast from the ends of those big boat docks all the way to the shore, no problem. Put it right where you want it, but they still sink real light and real slow for a real good presentation for panfish. Okay, now the whole thing with perch and fishing them in the winter, like we fish these little candy plastics and tubes, is a couple things we found. First, 90% of the people that try plastic fishing it's unbelievable how large of a bait you can get away with, even in the wintertime. Okay, this is my favorite lure, probably of all time, for catching big perch on our lake in the winter. that size candy plastic, which they probably don't sell hardly any of these. I mean, I'm sure they sell a lot, but they don't sell a whole lot of them to guys fishing for perch in the wintertime. They sell the ones that are a little bit smaller and a lot smaller than this one. Okay, when you catch perch in Lake Erie, let's say, in the winter, which we frequently do in the late fall and winter open water, you'll clean them. And if you open their stomachs, they're full of gobies about that big. Yeah. A lot of the fish that we catch here, I've found the last few years, I'm like this real weirdo about opening fish's stomachs. We clean thousands of fish, and I look in almost every one of them. I'm going to find some lady's wedding ring in some fish's stomach sometime. Lots of the fish we catch here, especially early in the ice season, it seems like, in December and January, when we typically fish a lot of marinas and harbors, you know, Beacons Cove, any of the harbors that are around here, up around Metro, you'll find a lot of small gobies and perch here too. Now, it's not quite as common as Erie, but you find a lot of them. Last year, we found that having a tandem rig like that, 2 tubes, one of these candy plastics, 2 of these candy plastics, whatever, fairly sizable baits, and dragging them on the bottom was a unbeatable way to catch the larger perch in the winter.
My question is, how are they tied on? I can't see that.
The whole thing, I'm going to talk about that in just 1 second.
Sure.
Black jig head. This is just, these are just little gray. I get a pack of 1,000 30 seconds. And the reason for it is I used to crappie fish a lot in lakes that had tons of brush, and we would just bust through these little jigs all the time. But I just get 30 seconds and use them for everything. They don't have to be painted. It doesn't matter. But when you fish these baits in the wintertime, if you don't have ice, you cast them out. You want a rod and reel combination that allows you to cast them. Okay, that's the whole thing. It doesn't necessarily need to be a certain stiffness or a weight or a size based on, you know, fighting the fish or catching perch. But it needs to be something you can cast. And you can go to a lot of places. You can go, this is going to sound crazy, you can go to Metro if there's no ice this winter, right along Black Creek, stand on the docks, cast this out on the bottom, pull it on the bottom, and I challenge you to make 5 casts without catching a fish. They won't always be big. There's days you'll catch big ones, and there's days you'll catch what they like to call smirch. Okay, but it's a very fun way to fish. The fish are feeding on a lot of different invertebrates on the bottom. They're feeding on a lot of different worms. They're feeding on little gobies. They're feeding, but you drag them on the bottom, and it's a fantastic way to fish. This deal here, the way this is tied, is you can't tie the top lure straight to your line, in my opinion. If you would think, well, you could just tie one to your line and not clip the end off and leave a big long end and clip the other one. If you do, if the top one can't swing, you never catch a fish, it seems like, on the top one, for whatever reason. This is actually an old rig. The way this is tied, and you'd have to probably look it up. There's a million ways you can accomplish this. But what I've done is I went up, you know, just looked up how to tie a loop knot, which a lot of people call a Rapala knot, which is originally intended to fish like a minnow bait. Any kind of loop knot that allows your bait to swing within the knot, okay? I tied a very large loop knot. And then the tag end I didn't clip, I tied my other lure to it. And you try and make it so they're about that far apart from each other. This is phenomenal, having these baits rigged like this, and I'm going to take this off and put my little twister back on. It's phenomenal for crappies in the spring, here and everywhere. You take 2 32nd ounce jigs, sometimes you can use 16ths, you put 2 little twister tails on for crappies, and you fish it around boat docks. Okay, and I mean, any of the major harbors in this general area, down at St. Clair Shores, anywhere, they all get good populations of crappies in the spring, April, May, going into June. You swim this around the poles, you cast it out. A lot of this fishing, you lob this bait up by the poles for crappies, it hits the surface of the water, you click your reel, and you'll watch your line, and you almost let the baits kind of pendulum back to you, and they're just swimming as they're sinking, and you'll see your line just go boop. And when you're around a lot of crappies, you can catch 2 of them at a time. But for the most part, this is if you ever get a chance, guys, too, I probably should have said in the beginning, everybody knows Plano tackle boxes, right? Plano's website is like planomolding.com. It doesn't matter. You can just type in Plano and it comes up first. They have a thing on there, a video program called Outdoor 365 with me. And it's all videos from duck hunting to bass fishing to crappie fishing to perch fishing to everything. Last year, ice fishing out of the duck boat. It's called Ice Fishing from a Boat. And it's shot here. And they're all videos of me. And a lot of them have this kind of stuff. So you'll see how it's done up close.
Cool.
What kind of line are you using?
This is 4-pound monofilament, whatever kind you want. Eileen XL, Suffix, Siege, whatever. Something that's relatively cheap. For crappies, when I fish in the spring, I like real high fluorescent stuff. It doesn't seem to bother the fish. And a lot of times when you're fishing around marinas and around docks in the spring for crappies with these baits, you'll cast your bait up and you'll see your line jump, and that's when they get it, because crappies will almost never pick it up on the bottom. Perch will almost always pick it up on the bottom. Crappies will almost never pick it up. You can have that exact rig like that, go into the harbors here in the spring and catch, 10 different species of fish, catch perch dragging them on the bottom, catch crappies throwing it up around the poles. Okay, so that's a little bit about that tandem rig. Any other questions real quick while we're...
Does that work well out in the weed beds in the lake too?
That's the thing. And I'm kind of bouncing around, I know, which is probably wrong, but this spring we did a ton of bluegill fishing and another fish species that's here, which is actually called a pumpkin seed. Anybody who's ever gone out here, especially around Geno's, and fished for bluegills in the spring, you catch a lot of fish that most people around here call sunnies, which have a real bright belly, kind of like your shirt. Has the same thing. They have a red spot on their gills, and those are pumpkin seeds. The biggest difference between a pumpkin seed and a bluegill on our lake is pumpkin seeds have grinders in their throat. Another fish on our lake that has grinders in their throat are freshwater drum. Sheephead. They both show up in the same general area because they both eat free tackle box, snails, crankbait. Who said it?
Zebra mussels.
Who was the first guy that said it? Did you? Somebody right here said it, right next to you. Was it you? Okay. Zebra mussels.
Oh, you did not say that.
They actually do eat zebra mussels. If you've ever gone out here and caught a big mess of really nice pumpkin seeds, threw them in your live well and took them home to clean the next day, they have a very distinct smell. That is because they eat zebra mussels, which when decomposed have a very distinct smell. Okay, they can actually grind the shells. So what the pumpkin seeds usually do is sit in the sandy spots between the weeds. And because of that, you can take a rig like this. They also like the bait dragging on the bottom. And you'll fish through those weed beds. This is light enough where when it hits the weeds, it kind of lays on the weeds. You'll feel them a little bit, kind of pop your rod, you'll get most of the weeds off. But you'll get in a spot, especially fishing out here, if you catch a pumpkin seed and you're bluegill fishing or pumpkin seed fishing in the spring, make a cast, bait's pulling on the bottom, set the hook, catch one of those big dinner plate pumpkin seeds. You need to stop everything that you're doing and concentrate on that exact spot where you just caught that fish.
Yeah.
Not you caught it here and you're looking here. I mean, you need to be looking right there.
Right there.
There's been several times, there were several times this spring when a buddy and I took, caught 50, 25 fish limit per guy, 2 guys in the front of a bass boat, right there. Where you have to, where we would catch them all in a spot about as big as that shanty. Okay, because they move into one area and they get on those zebra mussel colonies, and then they start to spawn in one area and they get it real. But it's so cool because you can go when the water's clear here. You can go in certain areas and you'll go in the weedy bays, especially up around my house, closer to like Mac and Ray's in that area. You'll go in the shallow weedy bays and there'll be bluegills. And then you go out just a little bit and there's a sandy spot and it's full of pumpkin seeds. And you got a little bit more and there's like perch, and then there's a bunch of bass. So I mean, it's a habitat type of thing. But the cool thing is that all those fish will eat those little plastics. When we fished, especially what was real popular this year, you guys probably saw that picture that was on the flyer where I'm holding up those 2 big perch.
Yeah.
It was on the flyer for this, and you can see the willow trees at Geno's in the background. And some guy on the internet was like, "I know your spot." And I'm thinking, dude, everybody knows that spot. This is the spot I take my picture spot. You know what I mean? But when you fish those places like that, shallow weed beds and things like that, you're gonna catch perch and rock bass and maybe crappies and bluegills and pumpkin seeds and largemouth until you're blue in the face, and you're gonna catch a lot of fish. And it's so cool because all different skill levels can go out with these little plastics like that with a little ultralight rod. Okay, this is also a little Daiwa setup, but this is a $30 rod and a $30 reel. Okay, and just that little setup. And I mean, me and my wife do it, and we take these couple rods out like that, and it's hilarious. You fish for an hour, you catch 40 fish, and you catch 7 different species, and you don't know what you have. You know, you catch a 6-inch perch, and your next cast you catch a 4-pound bass on this thing. So it's a really fun way to fish. So you need to look into doing it. The other thing is too, is talking more like, I don't know how many people really crappie fish here, but we talked about fishing those little plastics for crappies. Sometimes crappies and bluegills too, real bluegills, not pumpkin seeds. In the spring, you know, those fish are really a factor of their water temperature. And when the water's cold, in the spring, a lot of times they'll suspend. And when they suspend in the water, they're not on the bottom, they're not on the top. When it's cold, you kind of need to keep your bait at that level. And at that time, you probably want to use a little slip float, okay, or some kind of float to kind of keep your bait high. I don't know what I brought here. I just literally grabbed some of my boxes. But you're fishing a little float, whatever kind of float it is. But then under it, one thing that I really got on this year that was awesome here for bluegills and crappies was these little jigs. This is called a hot skirt. Okay, this is a VMC bait. And the difference in it, and one of the cool things, is that just like with these candy plastics, you know, it used to be that if you bought panfish stuff, you bought smaller versions of bass stuff and most of it was junk. This is a very, you know, very soft. See how the tail bends? See how it's super soft and subtle, and any water movement would make it. I mean, this is a premium lure. Okay, that's why it works so good. Just because they're panfish doesn't mean they're dumb. I mean, well, but it doesn't. but this is the same thing. This is a bait that's got a Mylar flash scale pattern in the tinsel that you could see. It's got a premium big VMC hook instead of a little piece of junk hook that hooks all the crappies that bite it. It hangs perfectly straight on the hook, and it's UV bright. Okay, I'm telling you, there were times that we put this little hot skirt jig on crappie fishing this spring that you could not catch them on a minnow, and you could catch them on this with no bait on it. Many times. Okay, where I had guys beat me badly using this little jig. It's not every day, nothing's every day in fishing, but premium bait. And sometimes having it fished under a float, you adjust your depth. You'll see some of those videos online that we're doing that, like up in Mac and Ray's Harbor and Belmar and those places. And it's the same deal. The fish will get, you know, a certain water depth, and it could be the same way on the main lake for bluegills. Bluegills here, typically you find more bluegills in the harbors or in the real shallow, weedy areas of our lake. Once you get more in the main lake where you're going to catch perch, you're probably going to catch rock bass and pumpkin seeds with it. Okay? And here's another thing too. If you're a guy that likes to go out and catch panfish and you like to eat them, how many people eat perch? How many people eat bluegills? How many people eat crappies? How many people eat rock bass? Okay, well they're as good as all the other ones I just named. Rock bass, if you take rock bass and bluegills and put them side by side, you absolutely cannot tell the difference. And they're this big in our lake. Okay? And in April, you cannot not catch them. You know, they're rock bass are some of the first fish to move up and to get in shallow water areas in our lake. Just little harbor entrances. You can catch them a lot of places. They like rocks, believe it or not. But you know, so some of these harbor mouths and things that have little riprap shorelines, even if it's only this deep, you can catch a whole bunch of rock bass. So, and they fight like crazy, and when you clean them, they give you a great big fillet that's real thick and wide. And this is like a premier rock bass lake, believe it or not. And it's mainly because how many people eat carp? How many people fish for carp? Okay, a
Just me,
couple.
I know.
Now, if I was in Europe and I did the same thing, every single person would raise their hand, both for eating and fishing for. How many people here eat sucker? Have ever eaten sucker? Smoked sucker? Okay? If you did that in Ohio and you raised your hand, they would go, "There's one of them boys from Michigan." Like, weirdos eating sucker fish. You know, it's a everything that swims, believe me. Certain fish have a gamier taste. How many people have ever eaten smelt? Okay? They're very gamey to most people. If you serve smelt in a restaurant in the South, they tell you, get out of town. Okay? So it just depends on what you like. I love smelt. I love gamey fish. I'm the guy that opens up the tuna can and pours the juice in his mouth. Okay? I'm just nuts for fish. Always have been that way. But I know that's a little hot flash or something, but it's true. But it just depends. But I'm telling you, the same thing holds for rock bass and different fish. The only thing I will tell you is if you catch crappies a lot, especially in the spring when the water gets a little warm, they start getting a little mushy. Anybody ever come up against that? Okay, here's a tip for you. If you catch crappies in the spring, do not clean them. Take them home, put them in a cooler, put them in ice, and clean them the next day. They're never mushy, they're super firm, and for whatever reason, they're also then firm if you freeze them and thaw them. It makes a difference. I don't know what it is, but somehow it makes a big difference.
Keep them alive all day too really helps
Yeah,
that.
if you can keep them alive, yeah, absolutely. So that's a little bit. Let me see if I've got anything else in my little box. How many people? Any questions on the panfish stuff?
So, for this, I'm gonna talk about some techniques for wintertime. What's about for right now, for perch?
For perch for right now, the first thing I would tell you is that you need to figure out where the perch are, okay? And a place like this that's a hub of information is always gonna help you because the perch this time of year are in big schools. And from what I know, most of the perch right now are in the lower end of the lake. A lot of them are from the 9 Mile area down, and there's a whole bunch of them in Canada. Okay, I don't know how many perch are right in this area right now, but they will be here, and they'll be by the entrance to Goose Bay by Strawberry Bar, and they'll be in Anchor Bay and some of the weed beds in Anchor Bay. But plastic fishing for them right now is going to be the same as it is in the spring and in the wintertime. You're going to be able to catch them on plastics. The reason I know that is because if you bass fish right now, you catch perch continuously on big bass tubes and bass rigs. When we fish for perch, there's a narrow window where there are huge perch in late May and June, if you ever fish here, in the areas near and south of the South Channel in the main lake. There's some areas out there that have a lot of rock piles. They call it the spoils area. It's near the firecracker area. And in June, we go out there and target them, and the best lure you can use is a 4-inch bass tube. It's this exact lure. This one. Not another one like this. This exact lure and size. And the reason for it is every single fish you catch on it's 10 inches or bigger. And there's so many fish out there and so many big fish. If you go out there in May and June, you'll see a lot of guys anchor up in minnow fish, and they catch 100 fish, and they keep like 12. We catch 30, and we keep 30. And I'm telling you, I even went out there with a guy, and I had a smaller tube. I had this tube, and it's a waste of time. You need to use a great big tube that time of year. If you guys fish this winter or this fall and you catch them, look